the future can be better than the past, but it's also something that we actually have to build. I do feel like California is more stagnant now than it was in the 60s. It's less of a physical frontier and more of a conceptual frontier, people working on new things, ruminating on that again and again and coming back to it and realizing, you know what, like I have to build it. People realize that that was not acceptable and that's not the California that we want. It does have so much opportunity and it's so beautiful and the weather's good. It's got so much going for it. People from all over the world who want to be part of that change and that innovation, they come to California.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the California Future Society podcast. This week, I have a great one for you. I have Devon from Edge Esmeralda. I have followed Devon's work for years now. I've read her essays, so the chance to speak with her and to talk about Edge Esmeralda and what inspires her about California was truly a treat. Edge Esmeralda is coming up at the end of May. It's a month-long gathering. It's just about an hour's drive north of San Francisco. If you're someone who cares about the future of California and you want to be surrounded by other bright, ambitious people who feel the same way, Edge Esmeralda is the perfect place for you. I highly encourage you to go check it out. In this episode, Devon and I talk about what inspired Edge Esmeralda, some of the lessons that they learned from the first year, what the Solarpunk aesthetic is, how that influences the branding and design of Edge Esmeralda. And then we also zoom out. We talk about the future of California. We talk about what inspires her in California and what does it take to foster a spirit of experimentation and optimistic creativity across the state. So I know you're going to love this conversation. I certainly did. Here's Devon. Devon, I'm so excited to talk to you today. You're a guest that has been on my list since I started this. And just to dive in right out of the gate, for those who don't know about Esmeralda Institute and Edge Esmeralda, could you explain what it is, how it started, what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So Esmeralda, which there's sort of two parts. There's the Institute, which is a nonprofit, and and Esmeralda Land Company, which is a for-profit development company. Really, you can think of it as developing something akin to a college campus, except something that's multi-generational. So instead of just being, 18 to 22 years old, it's for families that are range from, newborns all the way to centenarians and everything in between. And it's really modeled after my experience going to this town in Western New York called Chautauqua. My grandmother lives there, and Chautauqua, some people may have heard of it. It's been around for 150 years, and there was something called the Chautauqua movement. And it's the Chautauqua in Western New York is one of many. It's a small town of about 8,000 people. And in the summertime, they have 9 weeks of programming that range from lectures on string theory all the way to symphonies and ballets and operas. And to put it in context, like Chautauqua is 6 hours away from New York City. It's pretty far away from other major cities as well. And so for this town to have so much culture and so much knowledge and interesting stuff happening so far away, it's really this like high concentration in a very rural area. And I grew up going there every summer to visit my grandmother, and I always loved it. But it wasn't until about 5 years ago now when I brought my husband there and we were walking around and he was just like, oh, why aren't there more places like this? And it planted this seed of, yeah, why aren't there more places like this? And I ended up sort of ruminating on that again and again and coming back to it and realizing, you know what, like I have to build it. And I grew up in California and my community's there. And I always wondered, why isn't there something like Chautauqua on the West Coast, at least closer to my community? And so that was really the start of the idea for Esmeralda.
I love that. And I think I was learning more about Chautauqua as I was preparing for this. And it was cool learning about the trajectory, how it wasn't something that started big. It was incremental and it increased over time. So I know you've described Edge as a way to kind of shorten the feedback loop in city building, kind of in a way to quick prototype before you're laying down plans in concrete. Tell me more about kind of what that means in practice and what the pop-up village structure of what you're doing currently, how that informs how you think about the future.
Totally. So the permanent village that we're building is going to take some time to build because we're taking what's basically empty land right now. It's a former lumber mill site. And we're going to be building infrastructure, roads, et cetera. And that's going to take a while before we even can begin building the buildings. And so it's a very long feedback loop to develop anything. And so we've decided in that period, we're going to be running what we call pop-up villages, which are month long. Basically, you can think of it almost like a temporary college campus. We all go up to a small town in northern Sonoma County that's really close to the property where we're building the permanent village, and we have events scattered throughout the town and a number of venues, and really trying to recreate the Chautauqua model in a temporary way. And we call that Edge Esmeralda. It's a collaboration with Edge City, which is a group that hosts these pop up villages all across the world. And we did our first one last year. We had 1,300 people come. And the next one's about to start in just a month. Today's April 25th, and the next one starts the last week of May. And this has been such a great way to experiment with some of the ideas that are going to go into the permanent village. We can talk a lot more about that, but really learning things about urban space, the amount of programming that people want, what kinds of programming draw people up, how to create a cluster of a community. And to me, I come from a software background where we have much faster iteration cycles. You can write code and within a minute deploy it and have it be live on your website. That does not happen in real estate development, and maybe shouldn't even. These things are very long lasting structures, so they require more planning. But it made me want to find ways to tighten that feedback loop and figure out how to see the results of what we're building before we literally put it in concrete. Because there's already been things that we've learned from Edge Esmeralda that are going to inform the way that we design the permanent village, and hopefully the end result will be better.
I think it's incredible because not only by design, like you're saying, you have the structure, it's a month long pop up, but even in the tone and branding, everyone who's listening should go and check out the site. It has this, I think, aesthetic and brand of experimentation of play. You mentioned the intergenerational element of it as well. I think it's really cool. And, you've had one turn of the crank now, you've had one iteration last year, you have round two coming up. What were some of the big lessons and takeaways from the first time through? Was there anything that totally surprised you from the first round?
Yeah, definitely. I'm I'm trying to think about where to start. I mean, some of them are gonna sound very mundane, but I actually think those mundane details are a big part of what make a city or a town work well, or a community. And so, like, one thing that we're gonna change, that I'm really excited to see how that works out, is last year, every evening, we would partner with a different restaurant to be sort of the Edge Esmeralda meal hub, and everyone would go eat at that restaurant. And on one hand, that was great because it was the restaurants were wonderful and really great to collaborate with. But also, it created a very clear single spot for everybody to go to. But that was also the downfall of it, which was that there was one spot for everybody to go to. And when you have hundreds of people who are all going to one location at once, it becomes a bottleneck. And so this year we're trying something different where we're collaborating with a number of restaurants every night. And actually it'll be that number of restaurants every single day. And we'll instead have people a little bit more spread through them. And also we'll create edge specific menus at those restaurants. And so we're hoping that this can create a little bit more of a decentralized, like people can also have more options for their food. It's a little bit more spread out across these different restaurants rather than one being just jam packed. And it can also bring more business to more different restaurants. So that's something I'm really excited to see how that dynamic plays out. Um, and finally, it also gives people more options. I mean, last year, if you wanted to hang out with the community, but you didn't want to eat at that type of restaurant that night, like, you were out of luck. You'd have to like sort of make a trade off. So that's something that I think is actually going to make a really big difference in the day to day dynamics. And I think it will be for the better. But that's really the whole reason why we're doing this, is to see, how that can change, how we can learn from that and how we might want to structure things in the future.
Were there any unexpected moments of just pure delight last time? Moments where you didn't expect things to go a certain way or it far surpassed your expectations? Was there anything of that nature?
So many. Wow. Yeah. I think some of the best moments for me personally were A lot of people that I knew and I was friends with came up to the event to check it out. Some of them stayed for a week or 2 weeks or even the whole month. And for me, it was so special to be able to walk through the Healdsburg Plaza, which is sort of the center, really the heart of the downtown of Healdsburg. And I would just see one of my best friends sitting on a park bench, like doing math in a notebook, or another friend like walking her baby and around and getting coffee in the morning. And these are friends I've known for years, and maybe even like lived in the same neighborhood in San Francisco. But there was something about being in that small town environment where it just felt so much more intimate, and you would like bump into people on the street in a way that it just doesn't happen as much in a big city. Um, so those moments were really special for me personally. I think at the level of the event, something that we did not expect to happen at the beginning or didn't even like imagine, but ended up being one of the real highlights was some of the attendees took it upon themselves to start. There's this guy named Nick Foley who always had this idea of building what he calls a solar A-frame, which is basically like a sort of a camping structure made out of an A-frame with solar panels on it so that it has electricity. And he'd been meaning to do this for a while. And then he realized, oh, I have all these people who also like building stuff. Let's build a solar A-frame up in the woods in a formerly burned um, forest and make make a cool thing happen. And so over the course of the month, that group worked really hard to put together the solar A-frame and a few other structures in that forest. And towards the end of Edge Esmeralda last year, they hosted a solar powered night market where everybody, a bunch of the people who had been involved in building it and some others as well, set up cooking stations that were all solar powered, and they made delicious food and they invited everybody from Edge Esmeralda up. And that was really, really special and a beautiful spot too. And it was really cool to see this big forest that had formerly been burned several years ago starting to grow back and like have life in it again. And I had no idea that that was going to happen. That was just like the attendees taking it upon themselves to make something awesome happen.
It's so cool to hear about those moments of connection, those moments of unexpected delight. And I know when you and your team were writing about your reflections on last year, you talked about the principle of emergence, how something like 93% of the programming was created by the people there and not by you. That seems very exciting in hindsight when it works well, but I imagine it's also a bit terrifying going in when you don't have full control of the programming, you don't know exactly what's going to happen. How do you think about that from a planning perspective? How do you create a wonderful event without mandating everything while hoping for everything to emerge? How do you think about structuring that well?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think of it I think of our job as kind of like building a trellis that people can build upon. And so you do need to provide enough structure for like the vines to grow up, you know. It doesn't things don't just happen. But at the same time, you want to do sort of the minimal amount that allows for that growth to happen. And because the things that people will make will end up being way cooler than anything you could have done by yourself. Um, and so I think concretely what that looked like was we picked some themes. Each week has a theme. And we also tapped the shoulders of a few key people that we thought would do like particularly good programming. And we would say, hey, like we would love to give you this platform. We'll provide a venue, a space, and you'll have a bunch of people to talk to who are all interested in this. Do you want to give a talk or run a workshop or do this project? And then getting enough of those where it kind of like primes the pump. And then other people see what someone else is doing and they're like, oh, that's really cool. That reminds me that I wanted to do this project. Or, oh, that made me think of this other thing that would be really cool to add on to it. And from there, it just starts sort of snowballing. So I think that it's really just making sure that you like you prime that pump and get it going. But then once it gets going, it really has a life of its own, and it's almost more. We almost had the problem of having too much programming. Where in the end we were like, oh man, we're running out of venue space and time slots. And that's a great problem to have. Like there were so many people who wanted to provide stuff back to the community. So that was very exciting to see.
Totally. And One thing that's cool too about Edge is, like I was saying, the aesthetic. That it has that experimental, exciting, almost like feeling of childlike wonder when I go on the website, when I look at the content from last year. And I know you've spoken intentionally about shaping the aesthetic, whether it's kind of taking solarpunk influences or that small town charm. Like, tell me about solarpunk, tell me about the aesthetic choices, and tell me more about the importance of aesthetics for community building.
Yeah, totally. So I think aesthetics are incredibly important. Um, I It's almost hard to express how important they are, but I think that you can say a lot with words, but people who could be saying the same words, but if they pick a different aesthetic, it actually can it can show a very different like underlying orientation and like focus, I think, because a lot, like especially visual aesthetics will often capture things that you can't quite put into words, or like, in the imagery that you have, like the types of people who are included or excluded will actually tell you a lot, and that may not be something that anyone ever wrote down or like even thought about explicitly. I think aesthetics can often capture a lot of underlying assumptions that people don't even think to say out loud. And so I think there's a reason why people often end up getting drawn to vibes as much as they get drawn to like policy or concrete words. Um, and like in politics, people will often say, "Oh yeah, I'll vote for that person for president because like I'd like to get a drink with them." Um, and I think when I was younger, I used to make fun of that, and I was like, "Oh, that's so silly! Like you're not studying the policy." But I actually think that like getting being aligned to someone at a vibes level is something that it's more instinctive, and there's a lot that you can pick up from that. Now, I don't mean to undervalue the importance of policy or of words. There's a lot of value that can be made there too, but I just think that the combination is super important and powerful. You mentioned solar punk specifically, so first I want to define solar punk because I think it's
Please do.
at first not a super commonly used word, and then for the people who do use it, there's pretty wide range of definitions, and some of which are like in conflict with each other. So I'll define how I use the word. I think like what I find important about solar punk is a few things. So one is valuing family and intergenerational impact, and I think also embracing technology to solve problems while also appreciating that technology itself can cause problems. So it's not an anti-technology or pro-technology. It's like technology is a tool. It's something that can make our lives better or worse. It's up to us to shape that. Um, Natural one, you could probably see from my background, is having like plants and trees and flowers everywhere. I think that I know for me specifically, I really thrive in places that have a lot of greenery, and I think that that is true for many other people as well. Um, I think there's this word ecology, and like an idea of thinking of like an ecosystem and how all the different pieces play a role. And I think the solar punk mentality is thinking about that ecology in a deep way. And instead of just having, like, I would say that one thing way in which I differ from the way a lot of people use the word solar punk is they'll often like show these images of soaring towers with like plants on them, and the plants are great, but those soaring towers are actually very like not human scale, and often built they seem to be built in almost like a more egoistic kind of way, and more about like building a big thing as opposed to thinking like what is the day-to-day experience of living in these places. And I think like how does it fit into a broader urban fabric, for example. And so that's like one of the ways in which ecology plays a role. I think another piece is renewable energy. So, like, one of the reasons why Nick Foley's solar A-frame was so exciting to me was I think that solar power is and wind power and geothermal, those are really promising ways for us to power the future without seriously damaging the planet. Um, and I think another piece is just general optimism. So another punk that people talk about is often cyberpunk. So if you've seen like Blade Runner and movies like that, I think cyberpunk looks super cool, and I love those movies, but I don't want to live in that world. Whereas I think a solar punk future is like, yeah, technology is going to play a big role in the future, and but also let's make sure that it's humanistic and beautiful and solves our problems rather than just creating really cool problems so that we can have dramas and like make movies out of it, you know? Um, and then final one that I'll mention is like around do it yourself, like DIY and decentralization and more of a devolution of authority. So trying to as sort of like what we are talking about with the emergence that we designed into Edge Esmeralda, there are some things that are better to be a little bit centrally planned. I'm not like 100% opposed to any central planning. However, if possible, we should be trying to devolve decisions to a lower level so that people who have local knowledge can be making decisions on their own behalf. And then empowering them to do things themselves. If there's a problem, you should try to fix it, and maybe you have the tools to fix it, rather than assuming that somebody is going to come in and fix it for you. And that's not just about some like moralization or something, and like, oh, people are being lazy. It's also like if someone else comes in and fixes a problem for you, they might not actually fix it, or they might do it in a way that you don't quite want because they don't have all the context that you have. So trying to give people the tools to do that. I guess I'm talking a lot about solar punk, but it's a word that I really love, and I think it's I don't always love the way people use it, so I'm trying to like kind of reclaim it. I think one last thing I'll say is like a lot of people think of solar punk as anti-capitalist, and I don't see it that way. Actually, I see it much more about integrating externalities. So I think that the way that a lot of people talk about capitalism is sort of like just taking the profit motive and like greediness and just taking that to the farthest extent possible. But I actually think that like, and I think that in that sense solarpunk could be potentially anti-capitalist because it's trying to think about ecologies and systems at a broader scale. Um, but I would prefer that we define it as like, no, capitalism and having a profit motive can be a very useful impulse, and it can motivate people to do things. Like at the end of the day, it's about creating something that someone else values enough to pay you for, right?
Yeah.
So there's value being created there, but then at the same time, making sure that those externalities are captured and managed and dealt with so that an exchange that you and I have doesn't like hurt everybody else. um, so anyways, long way of saying I love the term solar punk, and it's really at the core of what we're building. um, but I also think that it's very easy to misinterpret it, or at least how I mean it, given that a lot of other people have different definitions.
I want to dig into that. There's multiple things that you just said that get me really excited, especially thinking about the distinct elements of California culture. But before we do that and move on to thinking about California more broadly, I want to make sure we like give a concrete plug with Edge Esmeralda coming up. I know it's in a month now. If someone's on the fence about joining or showing up, what would you say to them?
Well, this is mundane, but I think one thing is it just takes a little bit over an hour to get there from San Francisco. So you should just come up and check it out, even if it's just for a day or for a weekend, because I think you might be really surprised by what you find. My view is that with ecosystems, you actually just have to experience them firsthand. Like I can tell you a lot of stories of things that happened last year or share pictures, but to really understand a space, you need to like physically be there, I think. And I mean, the one thing I'll say is you got to be careful if you just come for a day or for a weekend, because you might end up extending your time. Last year, there were several people who ended up doing that. One person in particular came, I think, just for the opening weekend, thinking, "Oh, I'll just be there for like 1 or 2 days, then I'll go back to my life in the Bay Area." And she ended up extending by a week, and then by 2 weeks, and then next thing she knew, she was there the entire month. And we were really, really happy to see that she enjoyed it so much. And so that is the one word of warning is like once you experience it, you might end up staying for a lot longer than you originally planned.
Yeah, anyone listening should go check out the site, the speakers, everything. I mean, it looks like you have a really exciting month coming up. So encourage anyone to check that out if they're on the fence. Um, so I want to talk more about some of those themes of solar punk because when I hear those, it strikes a lot of notes of core elements of the California identity and California culture. In particular, I think optimistic visions of the future that integrate with nature. So many historical California art movements, architecture, all these different things are based around the environment, the climate, kind of being more integrated with that. So maybe one way to frame the question is as you think about you grew up going to Chautauqua. This is very much like a West Coast version of that, like you're saying. How do the distinctives of California and West Coast culture manifest in Edge Esmeralda? And maybe it's just in those solar punk aesthetics that you just described, but is there any other ways that you think about adding some California flavor, how that shows up in how Edge Esmeralda is designed?
Totally. So Chautauqua is by far the biggest inspiration for what we're building, but there's also some important things that I'd like to do differently as well. Um, I think like probably the biggest one that comes to mind for me is Chautauqua is very much structured as like knowledge consumption, and there will be people who go give speech on a stage, and they'll be like experts in their domain area, and they'll give like a world class talk. But those people tend not to be like in the community. They'll maybe stick around for a day or two after their lecture, but then they'll go back to their university or whatever. And the people who are in the audience like are audience members. They're listening and they're soaking it all in, and they're talking about it amongst themselves and really learning. But they're not. There's generally not this sense of like creating the knowledge that other people in Chautauqua are then going to consume. And I think that model works great for Chautauqua. But I think I imagine Esmeralda as having a much more like peer to peer kind of knowledge creation and knowledge transfer. Um, I think another piece that Chautauqua has, but I would love to lean into way more for Esmeralda, is the idea of actually building things and making awesome stuff. So Chautauqua has some workshops where you can like learn how to make a quilt, or the Chautauqua loves bats, which is a whole nother story of itself. But like you can make like a bat a home for bats so that they have like a little bat house to live in, and like there's things you can make there, or you can go learn how to sail on the lake. They're pretty active, but to me those feel a little bit more peripheral to the core. Like the core content at Chautauqua is like the lectures, and it's really content. Um, Whereas I think we love the speeches that people give, and talks that people give at Edge Esmeralda. But to me, actually, the most exciting thing is what comes out of those. Like if maybe someone gives a talk about something they've been thinking about, and then afterwards they have a conversation with another attendee, and then the next day they go start to build that thing, or they'll write a paper, or they'll start some line of research. And to me, those those sessions should be like a jumping off point to something more, as opposed to sort of like the end goal in themselves. So I would say that's probably the biggest difference that I'd like to see in Esmeralda compared to Chautauqua.
So that touches something that I've been thinking about a lot in my own writing, my own work, and talking to other people. Is that part of the reason I started California Future Society was this sense that we're in an era of relative stagnation in California, kind of an era of stunted possibilities compared to previous generations, marked by greater senses of experimentation. I'm curious. First of all, do you agree with that? Um, and then second, I guess, how do you feel like, not just at Edge Esmeralda, but in general in California or broadly, like what does it take to create a spirit of experimentation and a willingness to do that? Because it seems like there's been various ups and downs across California and American history. I'm curious how we stoke that. And so I'm curious your thoughts as you've thought a lot about it.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think so. I do feel like California is more stagnant now than it was in, say, the 60s. Um, but and I sort of think you can think of it as like the first derivative, right? Like how fast is it currently changing?
Mhm.
Um, and I think you can measure that in a lot of ways, like how much housing is getting built, or how many new things are getting invented here, or like cultural change, how much of that is happening. So that's a first derivative. But I think the thing that makes me more optimistic about California is, first of all, it's starting at like a high level. I think even though it's lower than before, it's still much more dynamic than a lot of parts of the country, I would say, and certainly more dynamic than most parts of like Europe, for example. And if I spend a lot of time in Latin America, and I love Latin America for a lot of reasons, but it doesn't feel like a place where people are often inventing things. Um, and particularly, I've spent a lot of time in Argentina, so that I should qualify that that's like a huge part of my experience. Um, so that's one, is like California is at a much higher level there, and people from all over the world who want to be part of that change and that innovation, they come to California. Um, I think the other piece is if you look at the second derivative, i.e., like the rate of change, like it's I think it's improved a lot just in the last few years. Um,
Tell me more.
I'm not entirely sure why. It might just be, I don't know, culture or something. Like it might just be a natural wave of culture. That doesn't. It's not very explanatory. But my sense is that in the last few years, at least among the people that I know, like a lot of people have been refocusing their focus on things like, how do we bring back American manufacturing? How do we build awesome stuff? How, this decline in housing production, how do we bring it back to where it should be so that we don't have this ongoing housing crisis? People, to me, it feels like it might just be a react. My best hypothesis is that it's a reaction of like just how stagnant things got. People realized that that was not acceptable and that's not the California that we want, and so we're turning around. I mean, one that's hit more mainstream recently is like the Abundance book by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. Like that's really, I think, starting to hit the zeitgeist, which is exciting to me. Um, and so uh, I'm hopeful. Like I do feel like things have been getting better on that front, and I hope that that continues in the future. Um, but yeah, I do think that there has to be a little bit of it gets worse before it gets better, unfortunately. And I'm hoping that we've gotten through the worst of it, and now it's all up from here.
That's our abundance mention for the episode. I need a bell because I feel like every episode it comes out. It's usually my fault that it comes up, but I think that theory makes sense about. I guess here I'll explain my theory, which is parallel to yours. I think political change and social change requires a moment of pain. Like the pain has to get to the point where it's intolerable to motivate people. Like people will tolerate a lot, particularly in a state like California that has so many tailwinds and things going for it. Um, in particular, I think it was episode 3, I was talking to the founders of Grow SF, and they've had this remarkable ability to help shape. They've had a lot of success in helping shape local politics in San Francisco. And even in their own story, it was kind of like, hey, COVID got really bad. We made some changes. Like that's what spurred them to then create the organization that led to change. It often takes some moment of like, wow, I can feel the pain of housing prices. So now I'm going to start looking into what does it take to create more housing or things like that. And perhaps this last decade is one where a lot of people in a lot of different of these various policy areas, they felt the pain in a way that then spurred action or spurred a type of exploration that previously didn't get enough energy or attention from them.
I totally agree with that dynamic. And you touched on something that I think is I'm very aware of. Like you were saying, California has so much going for it that it can be hard for people to, like for example, I think it's hard for people to move away from California because it does have so much opportunity and it's so beautiful and the weather's good. It's got so much going for it. And I like to joke that it's kind of like California's resource curse, where like things could
Yes.
get pretty bad before Californians would actually leave. And we are starting to see that now. Like, right? Like I think in the last few years, 1 million Californians have moved out of the state, in large part because of housing costs. And so we are hitting that tipping point, I think. But I think that there's a bit of a resource curse involved in California where it's just got so many great natural endowments or historical endowments that there's a lot of pain that people will put up with, unfortunately. And I mean, like, in San Francisco, like it's a city that has a huge budget. But if you and actually nowadays it does seem like things are getting a bit better. But there have been periods of time where you walk around and you think, oh, the city must not have any financial resources because everything's falling apart. There's tons of people living on the street. It's dirty. But then you look at the budget and you realize like, oh no, it's many billions of dollars. That's not the problem. Um, and I do think that sometimes things have to get really bad for people to wake up and say, this is not acceptable. Like I can't live like this.
Yeah, that struck so many chords. I had an essay that I like didn't fully ship. I just didn't feel great about how it landed, but it was on the paradox of plenty, on this whole idea, like the resource curse concept in California, where um, regardless of the governance decisions that we make, so many of the tailwinds, particularly around building world class companies, are just only solely exist in California. And so, we can govern however we want. Those companies are still going to be built here. They're still going to scale. They still have all these advantages and opportunities. And that's not even to tap into natural resources, natural beauty, all these other cultural amenities and things like that, and the diversity and the dynamic nature of California's culture and economy. One question I had was just, you have Edge Esmeralda, but that's not the end goal. You have this longer vision of building in Cloverdale. I just wanted to ask you about, given California, the challenging nature of building in California, of local politics often having a million veto points. It can just be challenging, and that's often a gripe that people have. So as you are thinking about how you build those relationships, how you map that out towards your long-term future vision, how do you think about relating to the local officials in Healdsburg, in Cloverdale, and these other communities that you're hoping to integrate with in the long term? What's your philosophy there and some of your strategy?
Yeah, those relationships with the locals are probably the number one most important relationship. So for some context, we're building Esmeralda within the municipal boundaries of Cloverdale, which is a great small town at the northern end of Sonoma County, and Cloverdale is our most important partner in all of this by
Mm,
far. I think like this, and that's not just because they're going to be the ones approving the final project. It's because integrating with the rest of that community is going to be really crucial for the success of this village that we're building. I'll be really concrete. So like for example, we there's going to be hotels on the Esmeralda land. There's gonna be like little coffee shops and things like that for people to go to, and it's going to all sort of be part of that broader village that's built out. And those retail in general and restaurants require a lot of people to come. Like it's like the people who are just within the Esmeralda neighborhood are that's not going to be a not large enough population to serve those businesses. And similarly, like we're not going to have also a large enough population to support some things like medical services and things like that. It's just not going to be that big. And so making sure that Esmeralda is seen as really a part of Cloverdale, and the people who live in Esmeralda can benefit from all the downtown businesses in Cloverdale, and people in Cloverdale can benefit from the additional restaurants and the additional people that are brought up to Esmeralda. That's like really key. And so making sure that what we're building is a win-win for Cloverdale and for Esmeralda is, I think, the thing that is so exciting to me about projects like this is that they can make 1 + 1 = 3. Like you end up creating more value for everybody because you have more together. And so yeah, Cloverdale is absolutely critical. I think one of the reasons why we are hosting Edge Esmeralda in Sonoma County, even though we haven't like put a single shovel in the ground yet to build the actual village, is because those relationships are so important. And so we were still looking for land last year when we first planned Edge Esmeralda. We had already identified this property in Cloverdale that we thought was so promising, but we were in the process of talking to the landowner. But we decided, we're gonna make this investment of doing this huge event up here as a way to start building relationships with the community, and that will actually make this project more successful when we do end up, sharing that we're thinking about this, and we'll start getting thoughts, and we'll actually know people at like a one-on-one level who can give us like real feedback about what it is that we're saying. And so as a result, we hosted Edge Esmeralda last year, and then a little bit later, we ended up announcing that we had just gotten under contract on this property with the seller. We had made an offer, and when that happened, there were dozens of people that I had met through organizing Edge Esmeralda who personally texted me and said, "Oh wow, that's so exciting," or "Huh, that I have a lot of questions." And I was able to have those conversations with people from the get go, and that I think it created that like open channel of communication that has allowed us to build a really fruitful conversation. And we're not going to get everything right every time. We can't read people's minds. And so being able to have that open channel for feedback is really critical so that we can adjust along the way before we actually like build stuff that's literally in concrete. I think another thing that's really cool about doing the Edge Esmeralda event is that it has given us a way to show, not tell, what we're doing. So we have special discounts for locals, and this year we're doing like Wednesday programming is going to be free for all locals, and one of the reasons we're doing that is because we want them to be able to see the kind of thing that we're trying to build on the Cloverdale property, and that'll allow them again to ask questions, to get a sense of it, and as opposed to being this big bad scary thing that, like, someone described in a New York Times article once or something, and they framed it however they, whatever the biases were of that particular writer. No, like, they can actually just go and see for themselves if they like it, and if they don't like it, that's okay too. I mean, we really hope that everyone likes it, but I think giving people an opportunity to form their own opinions, and actually like see for themselves is really great. So one other thing that we did too was we made a point of encouraging locals to be part of creating that emergent programming. One that I particularly enjoyed was I got to interview the city managers of Cloverdale and Healdsburg last year during our Cities of Tomorrow talk. Um, that's David and Jeff, and they got to talk about what it's like to be a city manager, which is a role that is absolutely critical for any city. It's like it's probably the single most important staff role, but most people don't know what a city manager is, and so that was really cool to hear them talk about that, and it gave them a really direct way to interface with Edge Esmeralda and like see it, for real. So it becomes concrete rather than abstract.
I think it's very cool. I love the way you all are going about it. I know this next month's going to be a huge success. So I hope that anyone listening who's on the fence takes the plunge and shows up for at least for a few days. I realize we're coming up at time. I want to wrap up on a few questions just about California. I know you're mentioning being from California. What elements of California culture, of California society, it could be a neighborhood, it could be a natural, landscape. What elements inspire you when you think about your own California identity and your relationship to it?
Hmm. Um, Great question. I think when I think of California, I think of the sense that the future can be better than the past, but it's also something that we actually have to build. So it's not
Mm,
just this sort of vague, oh, hopefully things get better and they'll probably get better, but rather like it can be better, but I have to do something about it to make it better. And um, I think that California really embodies that because a lot of people have moved here to create a better life for themselves. And it was the frontier for a long time, and in many ways it still is. It's just it's less of a physical frontier and more of sort of a conceptual frontier, people working on new things. um, and that's something that really inspires me about California.
I love that. And then lastly, the question I end every interview on, what is your hope for the future of California? Obviously, so much of it is wrapped up in what you're currently doing, but feel free to take it whatever direction you'd like.
I really hope that the California high-speed rail really works. Being able to take a high-speed rail between San Francisco and LA, that's someday in my life would really be a dream. Um, I'm not holding my breath because if I did, I would have been long dead by now. But I love the Shinkansen trains in Japan, and I think that that's such a great way to get around. Um, and I mean, this is not the same thing as the California high speed rail, but the smart train that runs from Larkspur Ferry in Marin all the way up to what will ultimately be the terminus in Cloverdale. Like I'm just like dying for that day that I can take the ferry from Embarcadero Station, San Francisco, then take the train all the way up to Cloverdale and without having to get into a car, and I can read a book along the way. Um, and so I would love to have a future where California is tied together with better train systems. And this is not so crazy because we used to have a lot of great train systems throughout the state and throughout the country. Um, we could do it again. It's not a technical issue. It's more of a social one. And I think we have it in us to make it happen. I just hope that it happens in my lifetime.
I share your hope and simultaneously am also not holding my breath, given the reality. So I'm glad we're both alive and hopefully, we're taking the train to visit each other's respective cities in the near future.
I can't wait. Thanks for having me
Devin,
on.
thank you so much.